Yuri Orlov, telling us about his life, and that he won't tell us lies just to do well on tape. He says that when he was a boy his family came to America straight from Ukraine, and that since he was a child he loved Eva Fontaine, a beautiful woman who didn't even know of her existence. Then we see Yuri arriving at his family's store, while he tells us that he lied about his name, because in the 70s being Jewish was an advantage, so his family changed their names to pretend to be Jewish. But even though it was just pretense, his father took it so seriously that he even seemed more Jewish than the real Jews. At his father's request, Yuri leaves his store to go to a restaurant to see the dishes of the day, but it is then that he ends up witnessing a failed murder attempt, which ended with the victim finishing off his attackers, and it was after that Yuri figured out what he was supposed to do. He takes one of the bullets and realizes that for humans, having weapons is a basic need in their lives, like drinking or eating, and that was the easiest way to make money, and knowing that he meets with a supplier and gets his first weapon to resell, a submachine gun. For Yuri, who had no idea how to be a weapons dealer, his first sale was like when he lost his virginity. He was nervous, not knowing what to do, and it ended quickly, but despite that, Yuri was successful and proved to be great with the weapons. And as a souvenir he turned his first round of ammunition into a necklace. So his next step is to call Vitaly, his drunk brother, to be a partner in the arms business. Initially Vitaly refuses, but realizing that his life is a mess, he decides to go headlong into the attack. Then the brothers go together to a closed convention of arms dealers. Yuri's main objective there was a partnership with the great negotiator Simeon Weiss, but as soon as he introduces himself, Yuri is seen as an amateur for wanting to sell weapons for more than just one side and is sent home humiliated, which makes him realize he will need to start all over at the bottom. Some time later the brothers go to Lebanon, where they are successful in making their first big arms sale, because after the local war is over, the United States leaves the weapons in warehouses. After all, it is cheaper to buy others than to transport them that are there. Yuri sells weapons by the kilo to the Lebanese, and this is only possible due to a treaty that was made with the colonel responsible for the abandoned weapons, but that was still not what Yuri wanted for his business. He wanted much more, and soon after, as they leave the shed, the brothers witness Lebanese soldiers using the weapons sold to eliminate several civilians, which greatly shocks Vitaly. Yuri was a man of many faces, supplying weapons to any army, selling Uzis from Israel to Muslims, communist-made ammunition to fascists and so on, causing his weapons to be present in 8 out of 10 war camps in 80s, but none of that mattered to him. All he saw was an opportunity to make money. Yuri was a man with many lives. In his personal container he had several identities and folders right for each situation, in addition to weapons, equipment, safes and so on. Then we see Yuri on the ship he used to deliver his goods. He made such convoluted deals with armies without financial conditions, that sometimes he didn't even know if he would be paid or not, and to keep the authorities in the dark he used words as codes to speak of weapons, practically what I do here on YouTube to not be demonetized. But unfortunately, during one of these trips by sea, the authorities end up being warned that Yuri's ship could have some illegality, and to get around the situation, Yuri quickly changes the name and flag of his ship, with the intention of impersonating another registered ship. At that moment the agents arrive at the vessel, and we meet Jack Valentine, a tough Interpol agent who does not accept bribes or anything like that, as he preferred the glory of catching a criminal rather than the money he would earn in letting him go. So even upon learning that the ship's name was clear, he still chooses to go investigate. After all, he felt that there was something wrong there. But Yuri is not intimidated by this, as he had several ways to avoid being caught. The dealer puts perishable and rotten materials in the containers as a way to discourage an internal search. All this while another officer bribed by him sends false information on the radio of the police, forcing Jack to leave without finding anything. Then we see that Yuri had some rules in the arms trade, and one of them was always to make sure he had a good way to receive the money so as not to be deceived, because one day while doing business in Colombia, he ended up receiving payment in powder from Pirly Pimpim instead of money, and when complaining about it, he was even shot by the buyer, thus teaching him another rule, never to be shot with the merchandise itself. But business wasn't all bad either, as the brothers took advantage of some of the material and made a good profit by selling it in the United States of America. But it could have been even better if Vitaly hadn't disappeared from the map along with 1 kilo of Pirly Pimpim. Yuri only went to find his brother a few days later, several kilometers away, stuffing himself with pixie dust while making out with some women. And notably his mental health was broken, because after his brother spreads the dust on the table, Vitaly ends up getting aggressive, causing Yuri takes him back to America to put him in a rehabilitation clinic. But with pity Yuri allows Vitaly to use the Pirly Pimpim one last time before they say goodbye. From this moment on Yuri was alone in business, but not unlike his brother, Yuri also had a certain addiction, Eva Fontaine. So his next step is to book a whole luxury hotel and hire her for a fake photo shoot, so that it's just the two of them in there, and his plan works. They both get to know each other better. Eva says that unfortunately she won't be able to come back to New York in time for a hurricane, So Yuri takes advantage of this and offers her a ride on her private jet. The next day we see that Yuri has spent almost all his money to rent a jet and bribe the crew to paint his name, all to impress Ava and show that the plane was his. In the middle of the flight, they both talk about life and work. Yuri pretends to be surprised when he sees a magazine where Ava modeled, and lies to the woman who works with international transport, although it's not really a lie. Both get closer when they discover they have things in common, and then the two kiss. Some time later, we see that they got married and now live in a penthouse. The atmosphere at the party is very good. However, Ava is sad for not having her parents there with her celebrating. Ava also says that she knows that he is more than he reveals, but doesn't pressure him because he doesn't want to see him lie, and just asks him not to put his family at risk. Then, next Christmas, Yuri tells us that he is mortgaged up to his neck and in debt, all this to maintain his family's standard of living, but something would change. After all, this Christmas Yuri sees the news that the Cold War is over, and it gets him so excited that he even ignores the fact that his son has taken his first steps. Later, while Yuri is talking to his father, Vitaly enters the apartment completely drugged, and because of that Yuri takes him once again to rehab, and after taking one last sniff, Vitaly asks his brother to be careful with the business, because unlike drugs, this means of making money will kill you from the inside. Times later Yuri goes to visit his uncle Dmitry Volkov, a general of the Ukrainian army. Yuri wants to take advantage of the discontent of the soldiers after the end of the war to buy their abandoned weapons, so both meet to discuss business, and despite rejecting the idea at the beginning, Dmitry is touched by the words of his nephew, who says that everything is a mess at the high command and that he doesn't even have anyone to report to at the moment, and because of that they wouldn't even notice the disappearance of the equipment, which is how Dmitry takes it Yuri to the sheds. And the end of the Cold War was the best time for arms dealers, and Yuri took advantage of this to expand the business, with thousands of Kalashnikovs, war tanks, combat helicopters and so on, and all of this was at his disposal to resell. And not even Simeon Weiss, who appears at that moment, was managing to steal Yuri's suppliers, so they go to a dinner, where Yuri comes out on top, calling Simeon an amateur and refusing a partnership, saying that Weiss does not know how to operate in the midst of chaos. Another day while Yuri is filling a ship with weapons, Agent Valentine arrives at the port, making Dmitry nervous about the situation, as Yuri is increasingly greedy and jeopardizing the operation, as selling military helicopters is a crime. But Yuri circumvents this by taking the helicopter's weapons and turning it into a rescue helicopter. Valentine approaches and shows he is not surprised to see Yuri, saying that he is always in the wrong place at the right time, and even surrounded by people. Yuri keeps calm down and explains that he has not committed any crime according to international transport laws, and that although Valentine suspects something, he will not be able to arrest him. After all, suspicion is not proof of a crime, and being a man who would not commit a crime to catch a criminal, Valentine turns and leaves frustrated. Dmitry is surprised and admired by his nephew, realizing that it was worth turning down several other arms dealers. Dmitry is even more excited to win a brand new car that was Yuri's, but unfortunately as soon as he goes to test it, he ends up getting caught in a trap and the car explodes, leaving Yuri sad and guilty, because the trap was for him. So in the middle of the night he calls Ava, because hearing her voice made him feel better, but a shootout starts and Yuri has to hang up. But even with the death of the general, business did not end there. In fact it only increased, and it was during this period that more than $32 billion in weapons were stolen and sold, and that in Ukraine alone. The main market for buying and selling weapons was Africa, and it was precisely in Liberia where its biggest buyer was, a local dictator educated in America called André Baptiste, who declared himself president. His reign was bathed in blood and bullets. He was known to torture and exterminate anyone who got in his way. One day while he was doing his business in Liberia, André Baptiste Jr. appears with a golden AK-47 and friendly invites Yuri to meet his father, and although this man is one of his biggest buyers, Yuri has no interest in meeting him face to face. Yet, after all, he was a brutal psychopath. After arriving at the fort of command, Yuri presents his weapons to André, but the psychopath takes the weapon and finishes one of his men, which makes Yuri extremely angry, taking the gun from the guy's hand and saying that now André will have to buy the used weapon. And, incredible as it may seem, Yuri's coolness and professionalism impresses the man who agrees to make a large-scale deal. After the meeting, André Jr. takes Yuri to the 2-star hotel where the businessman will spend the night. Inside the room there were 2 women as gifts for him, but for fear of catching an STD, which was normal there, Yuri ignores them and he just asks the girls to get the hell out of the room. The next day André shows Yuri how amazing his little army is, and after Yuri says that it would not be legal or feasible to put children in the middle of war, André just replies that the bullet that comes out of a child's gun can do the same damage than the one that comes out of an adult's, and to top it off, the dictator says he will pay Yuri in diamonds, as his country is not rich in dollars. Yuri also knows that André plans to launch an attack, and asks for it to be delayed by a week so he can provide tanks and heavy weapons, which will lessen the loss of soldiers, and André even calls Yuri a warlord. After that, Yuri returns to New York and tells us that at the end of the 90s, his wealth was already so great that he had even passed the lies he told his wife. Ava had started her career as an artist, and because of his wealth Yuri has become an anonymous sponsor, and upon arriving home he sees his wife extremely happy for her first sale, not knowing that Yuri was the one who bought it. Vitaly is at his house, and seems to be recovered from drugs, but jealous of his brother's success. Vitaly asks if Ava knows how her husband makes money, and Yuri retorts saying that she doesn't know and doesn't need to, because weapons are like cigarettes, but at least it comes with a security lock. And after the conversation Yuri reflects on how much Ava knows and how much she prefers to ignore for fear of finding out what she doesn't want. And the next day we see that not everything is going well for Yuri. Some of his purchases were cancelled due to peace agreements. Besides, he is also being followed by police, but when he enters a tunnel he manages to lose them and take the painting from Ava to your container. While there he gets a call from Ava, who is scared, saying men are going through her trash, and asks if there's something wrong that she should know about. But not to worry her, Yuri lies and says he loves her. After picking up Yuri's trash, Valentine pieces together the cut pieces of Yuri's contracts in an attempt to stay ahead of him. And from that moment Yuri is already the best arms dealer in the world. Instead of a plane he had a whole fleet to transport weapons anywhere in the world. And in most of his trips he didn't even take his documents, because the policing was nil and there were no radars on the coasts of Africa. But to his bad luck, during one of these trips his plane ends up being intercepted by an Air Force jet, and that was so unpredictable that not even his contact in the army could help him. And after the plane is hit by warning shots, Yuri does with the plane land in the middle of a road near some villages. He takes advantage of this and offers all the weapons for free to the local people, and thus he manages to get rid of all evidence of smuggling. Later Valentine arrives there along with an agent, and the guy realizes that everything was a plan by Yuri to get rid of the weapons, so the local agent says that they could finish Yuri right there, because no one would know. But because he is an agent honestly, Valentine locks him up there alone for 24 hours to prevent him from selling any more guns in the meantime and leaves. Then the locals get back in the plane and completely dismantle it. The next day Yuri is rescued and returns to his hotel room, where he is surprised by Andrei, who tied Simeon there as a gift for Yuri. After all, he was the one who finished off his uncle. Andrei takes Yuri's hand and guides it to shoot Simeon, and despite being able to stop this, the dealer allows revenge to take place. That same night Yuri goes to a bar, where he tries Brown Brown, which is a mixture of pixie dust and gunpowder, the same gunpowder that Yuri sells. Later he wakes up in a bed next to a girl. He is scared by the possibility of having an STD, but the woman gets up and leaves without saying anything. Yuri leaves the room while he hallucinates with Simeon shot. Because of the guilt, all he wants is to leave this life. Soon he finds a soldier who threatens to shoot him, but the gun jams and he offers to fix it, but ends up being beaten and left there, and even the hyenas move away from him when they see him, which makes him feel cursed. Back in New York, Valentine meets with Ava and tells her that her husband is an arms dealer, just like the ones who finished off the woman's parents, but scared to think about it, she sends them away. Later, when he returns home, Yuri finds his wife crying in terror, saying that she can no longer wear her clothes, lie in bed or stay at home, as there is blood everywhere. Yuri confesses to being an arms dealer, and Ava says he can stop since his family has enough money, but for Yuri it's not the money, but because he's good at what he does, so Ava gives him a choice: your business or family. And in an attempt to keep his wife happy and the family together, Yuri begins to operate in legal businesses such as selling wood, and even Valentine, who was listening to everything with a wire, begins to find it strange, because months have passed, that Yuri does nothing wrong. Soon Yuri becomes frustrated with the difficulty of making money legally, but he continues because of the promise he made to Ava. Until one day, Andrei and his son arrive in America for a talk about peace, but just before that, he visits Yuri in the hope of getting back to doing business. Yuri rejects it at first, but when he sees the huge diamond he could receive, the guy doesn't resist and accepts his last deal. On another day, when he was about to leave, Yuri explains the reason for his trip and asks if she believes him. So Ava looks into his eyes and says yes, but Yuri knows that she was lying, just like he used to. Then we see that Ava follows Yuri to his private container to see if he was lying. After he leaves, Ava goes there, and to her surprise the password was her son's birthday. Inside she finds the weapons, the multiple identities and also her own painting, and leaves the place devastated after realizing that it was all a big lie. We then move on to Yuri, who before going on a trip pays Vitaly a visit and calls him for one last job as a security guard. After all, this was his biggest business and he needed someone he could trust, so Vitaly accepts. After landing in Liberia, Andrei welcomes them happily, as his presidency was seen as official by other countries, and then he warns that the deal will only be closed when these weapons are delivered to Sierra Leone, which is where they should go. On the way we see how the minds of the local soldiers were warped, because despite calling themselves by noble names like freedom fighters and such, they still shoot innocent people in broad daylight. Upon reaching the place of negotiation, While terms are being discussed, Vitaly spots a woman being attacked by several men with machetes while protecting her son, and traumatized by this, he pulls Yuri from the discussion table to try to convince him to end the deal. Business, as these weapons will be used to exterminate civilians. But Yuri says that if they try to stop things there, they will be murdered on the spot, and completes by saying that what these men do with weapons is none of their business. So even though he is disgusted by the thought of his brother, Vitaly pretends to understand that and appears calmer. But as soon as Yuri returns to the discussion table, Vitaly goes to the trucks, takes a grenade and blows up a truck, along with Andrei Jr. who tried to stop him. Seeing all this happening, Andrei takes a gun and fires several times at Vitaly, who falls lifeless to the ground. And despite being totally devastated by what happened, Yuri ends negotiations with Andrei, receiving only half of the agreed price. After the negotiation ended, things happened just as Vitaly predicted. Several civilians were exterminated during the week, but Yuri says that this was inevitable. And he completes by saying that he disagrees with the phrase evil triumphs when good men fail, when the right would be, evil triumphs, and that's it. Yuri also reveals that he now has even more in common with Andrei than he cares to admit. Later we see Yuri taking Vitaly's body back home, but because he only paid $20 for a doctor to remove the bullets from the body and make a false death certificate, a bullet ended up being found in the airport inspection, and this leads to Yuri being detained. Yuri tries to call his house, but Ava and her son are already leaving the place, ignoring the call, so he calls his parents, and his mother says that now her 2 children are dead. We then move on to Yuri in custody, being interrogated by Valentine, who reveals that when Ava followed Yuri, the agents followed her, thus reaching Yuri's personal container, and that it's not her fault, she was just easier prey. So Yuri asks Valentine to take advantage of his moments of ecstasy and say everything he wanted, because they don't have much time, and Valentine says that Yuri still doesn't understand the seriousness of the thing, and that he will be imprisoned for several years. But Yuri says he fully understands. After all, his wife and children left, his parents abandoned him and his brother was killed because of him, and so he understands the situation completely. Yuri continues and explains the next things that will happen. He says that an agent will arrive there and praise Valentine for the great service, but that he will need to release Yuri, because he may be a criminal, but the people he does business with are allies of the United States, then the country will turn a blind eye to it. Then Valentine hears someone knocking on the door and thus realizes that everything Yuri said was right, but before leaving, he said that he doesn't need to send Yuri to hell, after all he is already in one. And in the end Yuri goes back to doing what he does best, dealing in weapons. He ends by saying that in the end who will rule the land are the arms dealers, because everyone else will be busy killing each other. And the movie ends here. Thanks so much for watching. Let us know your thoughts on the film in the comments section below. If you enjoyed the video, please like it and also watch some of our other videos. And before you go, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more movie recaps.